going to do a quick tutorial. You guys have left for the day if you're here on Tuesdays. Quick tutorial of the skull bones, okay, to help a little bit with the fact that we're not going to be together in lab quite as much. So this is what you're going to have to do with me in the lab. You're going to have to be able to identify every bone, that if I just point to it and say, hey, you identify this one, you know, to person A, then they have to tell me the name of it, and then person B has to tell me a different bone, okay? So I'm going to take the mandible apart from the rest of the skull because it's just not attached with the spring correctly. So here's the lower jaw, or the mandible, coming off, okay, on this fake skull. Then the frontal bone, there's a lot of glare on this since this is the fake one. This is the frontal bone, okay, on the anterior aspect of the head. And then if we go to the top of the head, okay, the bones that are behind the frontal bone, those are the parietal bones, right? And that suture, that's the frontal or the coronal suture, just going back to the beginning of the year. The bone that's on the posterior aspect of the head, that's the occipital bone. And you can see there's a suture there, okay, between the parietal bones and the occipital bone. And then on the sides, the other large bone, okay, because I'm starting with these four large ones, right? This is the temporal bone, and then here's the other temporal bone, okay? In the temporal, the parietal, the occipital, and the frontal bones, we're going to see that we're going to have the same four lobes of the brain. So we're going to see those four words again. Mandible, like I said, I took that off. The upper jaw is the maxilla, okay, and it actually runs up and touches the frontal bone up here, okay. I'm going to switch for a minute to the to a real skull. Okay, so on this real skull, same bones that I just went through. I'm not going to hit all of those again, but I'm going to flip this over so that we can look in the roof of the mouth, okay. So I'm going to point to this back region right here, right? And there is, and I'll click that so I can point a little bit better. There's a suture right about where the tip of my pen is, okay, going all the way across, right? This little bitty bit back here, that's called the palatine bone. The rest of the roof of your mouth is the maxilla. So the maxilla makes up most of your hard palate in your mouth. And then the very back of your hard palate is the palatine bone. So if you stick your tongue in the roof of your mouth and kind of run it with some pressure along the roof, and then it suddenly turns to soft palate, this is where you would feel it turn soft, okay, right behind the palatine bone. Okay, so again, that's the palatine bone. You don't see that on your diagram, okay, and then there's the maxilla, again, is the roof of the mouth, right? And then when we're looking at this skull, again, all this is maxilla. Okay, and it runs up and touches the frontal bone, which it's really hard to tell that on this skull. Let me turn this, or pause for a second. All right, next, the two little bitty bones that meet in the middle, and there's a little suture going down the middle. That's the nasal bone. Okay, I'm going to switch to the fake skull. All right, so nasal bones on the fake skull, okay, right underneath my finger there. Okay, and you can see the suture going down the middle of those. Let me switch again. Right, next, I don't know how well you can see this and how good of a job I'm going to do at keeping it in the frame here, but there's a bone. Oh my gosh, can't get the pen in the right direction. Hang on. All right, so I couldn't do that well on the real skull, but my point in trying to use the real one for the next bone was because of the fact that it actually would have the hole that you need to see in it. So the next bone I was going to show you, if I can get the angle correct, okay, is this little bone, essentially right here that my finger's on. That's the lacrimal bone, right? And that's where your tear glands are going to be going through. So essentially on a real skull, and sometimes on the models, there will be a little hole in that bone. And then right behind that, oh gosh, wrong hand, y'all, sorry. I told you this was going to be awkward. This bone that I'm pointing to now, that's the ethmoid bone. Okay, and then when you go back to a little bit behind the ethmoid bone, you're going to have a portion of the sphenoid, and then you've got the sphenoid that we can see, and I pointed this out as the brace that looks like a little bat. That's part of the sphenoid. Okay, the other thing that I need to mention that I just realized I haven't done yet is the zygomatic bone, or the cheekbone. Let me pause for a second though. All right, so starting where my left hand is already touching the skull and then going to here, okay, that's all your cheekbone, which is your zygomatic bone. This part right here is the temporal bone, and then the zygomatic bone touches the maxilla right here, okay? Not ideal for me to walk through it like that, but maybe it'll help a little bit. I'm going to switch it one more time. All right, so then in case your group is one that I didn't do wormian bones with, these are little wormian bones, these little sutural bones. So they are small bones within the larger bones of the skull, and they form between the sutures. And as I told some groups, they don't form in the same place in everybody. They're not the same shape or the same size in every person. Okay, so you and I may have different wormian bones than this person did, okay, and in different locations. Hang on, I'm going to pause again. Right, and then you're also going to label this little projection, this little hole, okay, on the skull. Then if you'll notice right here, and you don't have to label this, but that little projection, that's the mandible, right, touching, okay, the top portion of the skull. Let me see if I can come back a little bit here, okay. And that's one thing that you're not having to label, but that we'll attempt to talk about a little bit, okay, and that's right in front of numbers 4 and 5 that you do have to label. I'll let you figure out what those are. Okay, and then you also have to label this little hole right here and the one that's on the other side. Okay, these are foramen, okay, and they have a specific name in the mandible. Okay, and they're not mandibular foramen, okay, but you have to label those too. Okay, and I didn't hit everything on here, but like I said, just wanted to give you an idea of what you're going to have to be able to point out to me on the skull. So I'm going to point to a bone. You're going to tell me the name of the bone, okay, or those structures as far as the sutures and the various structures on the skull. We're going to focus on bones, okay, on Thursday or Friday, depending on what day you're here with me. So you got to make sure you're ready for that and for the classification in number 8, in addition to having all of the bones, having all written components of the entire lab data sheet completed when you walk in the door. Make sure you read the assignment on Google Classroom as far as some very specific things about what's required of you with joints and what have you. But hopefully that helps at least just a little bit. I know it was by no means perfect as far as the video. Let me know if you have questions.